Well, good afternoon all. I start by saying dear students and would like to say dear fellow students, because in a way I consider myself a 70-year-old student. Because when I was a boy, my father said to me, learn something every day, son. And I've tried to do that ever since. It's not that difficult, really. I'm sure most of you do the same. And this week I am in Georgia to learn. Learn from you, learn from others. And hopefully I can also share with you some reflections on, well, as I take you on my 50-year international journey. I will briefly discuss a number of issues that are important to people in Georgia, that are important to people also in Norway, and in Argentina, in South Korea, in Ireland, and in Nigeria. In short, issues important to the world. We live in a very interdependent world. International rules, dialogue, cooperation between countries, and concern for each other are crucial for peace and understanding between nations. I come from a country in the north of Europe, bordering Sweden, Finland, and Russia. We have good relations with all three countries. We're only 5.3 million people, so much less than the state of Georgia, of course. But we live in, I would say, a very healthy society with a relatively high degree of social cohesion. And in a country where women, in particular, play a more important role, I think, than in maybe any other country in the world. Now I'm talking about a role in politics. Today, both our Prime Minister, our Minister of Finance, our Defense Minister, they're all women, and they all do a great job. And the active role of women in all aspects of life and society is one major reason why Norway, which about 100 years ago was a relatively poor country, today has one of the highest per capita incomes in the world. I repeat, it's the role of women, which is one of the main factors. Now, I'm not going to speak more about my country. I suggest, if you're interested to learn more, just Google Norway and find out. Now, it's great to see you all. When I look at you, you don't look that different, really, from what students looked like at ABAC 50 years ago. Somewhat, but not that much. And Jimmy has changed a bit. We just made a tour of campus, and campus has certainly changed. I don't recognize more than one building, I think. That's all. And a few days ago, before leaving Norway, I looked through the ABAC. That was the annual book of ABAC at the time. And it brought back many pleasant memories from campus life. My first memory from the dining hall was when a female student, she burst out, "Gosh, look at the way he eats." True, we hold and we use knife and fork a bit differently in Europe than here. But we do use our mouth and teeth the same way, I think. I first found the food quite good, except grits. But after a while, I got a bit tired of chicken 5 times a week. In physical education, PE, I registered for American football. I knew nothing about American football. Or touch football, of course. I had nothing to offer the team. I was a nuisance to the team, I think, until my teammates realized that, well, I had played soccer. I was a good kicker, so that was my job. There was one black student at ABAC at the time, just one. And guess where he was from? Southern Africa, I think Namibia. I think campus was maybe a bit safer, or society was a bit safer. There were 2 security officers on campus at the time. Now I think you have a police force of 12, 14 or something like that. ABAC students were not allowed to drink any kind of alcoholic beverage at any time, on or off campus. I understand that has changed. Well, I'm not talking about what you're doing, I'm talking about what you're allowed to do. And that also has changed. ABAC had a debate team that I joined. And one week we went to Greenville, North Carolina, for Little United Nations. And our task there was to work for a draft resolution establishing a nuclear-free zone in Southeast Asia. You know, this was during the time of the Vietnam War. Actually, the war ended 8 years later, and no one knew how the war would develop. And I remember some male students here at ABAC that were, they feared that they would one day be drafted and asked to go to Vietnam and fight. 1 week ago, I read through 44 letters that I wrote to my family while I was here at ABAC. I think you have heard of those things that your parents did with a sheet of paper and a pen, an envelope and a stamp sent to their parents to report how things were, or not exactly how they were, maybe. Facebook may be faster than traditional mail, but I wonder how many of you can, 50 years from now, go back and read the reports you sent home. Think about it. Maybe you should do something about it. And some of you do, I'm sure. So much for ABAC nostalgia. That's not really what I have come here to speak about. But here at ABAC is where my international journey started. I got a scholarship from the Georgia Rotary Student Program. The program is now in its 71st year of promoting peace through world understanding. More than 3,500 students have been through this program since 1946. And this year's class consists of, or is comprised of, 36 females and 15 males from 17 different countries, attending 24 colleges and universities in Georgia. I was one of the lucky ones who got the opportunity to spend 1 year in Georgia, thanks to Georgia Rotary and the Tifton Rotary Club. That year has been of great value to me and to my life. I guess in some way it helped prepare me for a diplomatic career. My international journey has since brought me to a number of exciting places. Now I ask you to travel that journey with me. And as we travel, I will share with you some reflections on a number of important issues the world is facing. First, after my year at ABAC, I had some basic military training back home, and then I went to Paris to learn French. There I experienced student rights firsthand. This was 1968. Tear gas in the famous Latin Quarter, for instance. Student protests, partly inspired by the free speech movement at Berkeley University in California a few years earlier. But in France, the consequences were wider. Actually, the student protest movement, supported by many workers and trade unions, toppled the government. And it ultimately, the following year, led to the fall of the well-respected president of the French Republic, Charles de Gaulle. It was the French Revolution of the 20th century. After graduation from the Norwegian School of Economics and Business Administration, I worked as information officer in the Norwegian Export Council. And I'll come back a little later to a few words about export and imports and trade. But after a short while, I got an offer from the Foreign Ministry, And when I was 25, I was sent to my first embassy to serve in The Hague, the Dutch capital, the Netherlands. The Hague is the site of the International Court of Justice, which is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. And I ask you, as I did this morning, the group I spoke to then, how many of you have heard of the International Court of Justice? 1, 2, 7, 12. Okay, it's not bad. The court's role is to settle, in accordance with international law, legal disputes submitted to it by member states. And when I was in The Hague, the most prominent case was the so-called Cod War, actually the second Cod War, between the UK, a major European country, and tiny Iceland. The latter claimed extension of fishery jurisdiction in waters between the two island countries. And the two states had earlier agreed that if they were to have any disagreements in the future, okay, they should ask the International Court of Justice to rule. And the court ruled in Iceland's favor. Iceland set an example, and today 200 nautical miles is the sea zone prescribed to nations as part of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And an institution like the International Court of Justice is of particular importance to smaller countries and to medium-sized countries. And the same holds for the United Nations itself. Because history has shown, again and again, that without binding international rules, powerful countries have a tendency to behave as they like, without much regard to international law. Sometimes they even back up their narrow national interests with military power. As we have recently observed, 2.5 years ago, when Russia occupied and annexed the Ukrainian peninsula, Crimea, in the Black Sea. And nowadays we see how China is behaving quite aggressively in the South China Sea, establishing artificial islands and claiming territorial water rights outside of these islands. After 2 years in Oslo for diplomatic training in the foreign ministry, I went back to the US and served 3 years in our embassy in Washington, D.C. This was the time just after Watergate and after President Nixon's resignation. People were fed up with the political establishment. There was, as you know, I'm sure, a strong anti-Washington sentiment. It may have some resemblance, actually, with today's situation. I was a guest at the two national conventions, attended Jimmy Carter's inauguration, as well as one of the inauguration balls, black tie balls, where all that was served were Coke and peanuts. I was personally very happy that Jimmy Carter was elected. But I agree with those who think that most of his success came after he left the White House. He is highly admired internationally for his work for peace, democracy, and human rights. Jimmy Carter fully deserved the Nobel Peace Prize, which he was awarded in 2002. A prize awarded once a year by a committee selected by the Norwegian Parliament, and he went to Oslo to receive that prize. While in Washington, I think I got a pretty good insight into American political system, how it works. And, well, no democracy in the world is perfect. Not yours, not mine. Critics of how the system works in the US today tell me about big money influence, party elite dominance, too strong lobbying and special interest groups, biased or one-sided media coverage, etc. From a European perspective, and from my perspective, it's a bit difficult to understand what is really going on in this year's race for the White House. I think we hear more negativism than what the two candidates will do once they are elected. Maybe this evening's debate will make us a bit more informed. Today's young Americans, you, can influence the way the political system will work in the future if you're not pleased with the way it works today. My advice is get involved. Politics is about your future. I encourage you to vote in November. From Washington, I went to Latin America, Caracas, Venezuela, a country liberated from Spanish colonial rule almost 200 years ago, under the leadership of General Simón Bolívar. Venezuela is, in many respects, still a wonderful country, or it was, I should say, when I lived there 40 years ago with my family. It's very scenic. It's very rich in natural resources. It's a major oil supplier to the US. Venezuela is also a good, or rather bad, example of how widespread corruption can ruin a country. Its economy, its society, its people. It's really tragic. I think students of natural resource management at ABAC would do a much better job at harvesting the rich natural resources of Venezuela in a sustainable way and distributing the wealth in a socially responsible manner. Because Venezuelan politicians, they don't know how to do it. From Venezuela, I went back to Oslo for a 5-year period and first became political advisor to the Ministry of Trade and Shipping. We traveled all over the world: Moscow, Beijing, Ivory Coast, Brussels, Japan, Washington, and wherever we went, our message was free trade, but free trade under certain regulations. Had it not been for trade between nations, we would all have been less well off. Much of our welfare can be attributed to division of labor among countries. Admittedly, in some areas, globalization may have gone too far, and not all the people have yet experienced the benefits of trade. But the return to protectionism, I'm convinced, will not create more sustainable jobs and will not help the overall economy in the long run. Job losses are mostly due to technological development, new technology, and structural economic changes. If a country chooses to close its borders to imports, subsequently will it be unable to export its own products and services, like American aircrafts or soybeans? Over time, everyone will suffer. But we must also find ways to reduce economic differences between or inside nations and between nations. I think that's one of the major challenges today, economic differences growing. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing. It can't go on like that. Then I became director of the Foreign Minister's Office, which meant, again, a lot of traveling. To New York for the UN General Assembly, to India for the funeral of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who had been assassinated, to Washington, D.C. for meeting, lunch in the State Department with Secretary Schultz. Because the US and Norway have very close political ties. During a 50-year period, nearly 1/3 of our population emigrated to America. Most of them settled in the Midwest. We will never forget the decisive role that your country played in ending World War II, thus also helping liberate my country from a 5-year-long Nazi occupation. We are very grateful for that. And all Norwegians who grow up are told this and taught this. Since that war, our two countries have been close political and military allies. We consult on a number of issues, not only bilateral ones, but also on matters on the international agenda, like, for instance, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now I'll ask you a question. If you know, anyone knows, which city in the world is considered the most international city? It's not Tiffany, by the way. Okay, I'll tell you.
You gotta guess.
Is that New York or Cali? No, either New York or, I'm sure Cali, forgot.
Okay, New York is not a bad guess, but it's not quite correct. It's Geneva, Switzerland. 1/3 of the population. You thought about that, right? Next time, don't just say it. Yes. 1/3 of the population comes from countries all over the world. While New York is the main headquarters of the United Nations, Geneva is the site of its European headquarters, hosting the High Commissioner for Refugees, High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN Agency for Humanitarian Assistance, the International Labour Organization, the World Health Organization, etc., etc. For me personally, when I was for 4 years posted in Geneva, worked in the Norwegian Permanent Mission to the UN, environment was the work that really was very rewarding. Because while I was there, the report, Our Common Future, was presented to the world in 1987. This was a report prepared by a commission chaired by my former Prime Minister, Mrs. Brundtland. And this World Commission on Environmental Development alerted the world on the consequences of continued unlimited use of natural resources and of damage to the environment caused by an increasing level of production and consumption. The report introduced the concept sustainable development, meaning that economic activity today always must keep in mind also the needs of future generations. My task was to argue for the report's implementation through programs of the relevant UN agencies. Almost 30 years later, now, today, I see that the world would have been in a much better shape if governments had taken the report's conclusions more seriously back then. I wish we had seen more courage and responsibility from leading politicians who unfortunately often are more concerned about the next election than by the long-term needs of society. From Geneva, I moved to the French capital, Paris, where 22 years earlier I had been a student. It's a fantastic city. If you visit Europe one day, make sure you include Paris in the program, in addition to the Norwegian fjords. Of course. The Charter of Paris for a New Europe was adopted by a summit meeting of European governments and Canada and the United States in Paris in 1990. And that summit can be seen as the peace conference of the Cold War. You were lucky you didn't experience the Cold War, but it was quite chilly, I can tell you. And as I told you before, we border on Russia, the then Soviet Union. But now we have a very good relationship with them, although we disagree on a number of issues. Well, then political and economic restructuring in the then Soviet Union, called perestroika, had put an end to communism and the ideological division of Europe. It was really something to celebrate. After 4 years, I left Paris for my home base, Oslo. Now my interest and work focused for a large part on climate change. In 1992, governments had adopted the first international treaty to address the issue of global warming and climate change. Most scientists throughout the world agree that man, or woman, or you and I, we contribute to an increase in global temperature because of our lifestyle. An increase that could reach more than 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of this century. Your grandchildren will be alive then. Maybe even your children. Yeah, sure, some of your children will be alive then. Among the effects will be the rise of the sea level, more heavy rain and floods, drought and water shortage in parts of the world, dramatic changes in biodiversity with, among other negative effects, consequences for medicines. The development of new medicines rely to a large extent on our biodiversity and the rainforests, not the least. Lower parts of Manhattan may be threatened, as will low-level coastline in other parts of the US and other countries. Some island states in the Pacific will, or may at least, cease to exist altogether. We will see huge numbers of climate and environmental refugees. I mean, today we think there are many migrants or refugees fleeing Africa, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan. We ain't seen nothing yet. There will be many, many, many more. One day those migrants may be tens, if not hundreds of millions. Many of them will come to Europe, some will go to Australia, still others will come and knock on your door. Climate change is about to become a serious strategic threat. I can think of no greater challenge to mankind today than the global warming. It means we have to reduce rapidly and substantially our dependence on, in particular, coal, but also oil and natural gas. The world has been too slow to react to scientists' warnings and advice. But when they met in Paris last December, world leaders finally agreed on the way forward. They agreed to take decisive steps to limit and reduce carbon emissions. Bold action is long overdue, but better late than never. Will be interesting to see, though, what happens. I mean, President Obama has signed the Paris Accord. Will it survive the election? I hope so, because it is so important what the United States will be doing, together with China. China today is the world #1 emitter of CO2. But it's a country with 1.3 billion people. So per capita, it's the US which is leading. So you and China also have to take the lead in finding solutions, and, well, we cross our fingers. Those who deny that global warming takes place, and I'm fully prepared to see that there are many of you who are among them. But those who deny that global warming takes place, and that it is partly man-made, because it's only partly man-made, volcano eruptions, solar activity, etc., also contribute. But those who deny that, in my mind, assume a heavy responsibility for man's future and for the lives of our children and grandchildren. It's therefore encouraging to see how rapidly many countries are now switching from carbon to alternative renewable energy sources like solar, wind, biofuel, hydrogen. In my country, Norway, electric cars have become extremely popular over the past 2-3 years, thanks to economic incentives and other privileges for users of those cars. Now I'd say we urgently need a switch to a green economy, as we call it, less dependent on carbon. And I say this coming from a country producing a lot of oil and natural gas, with the second largest supplier of natural gas to the rest of Europe after Russia. So we have a dilemma, but we realize we have to switch more from oil, coal first of all, oil, natural gas. And the sun is there, and the wind is there, renewables. In 1999, I had the privilege to become a student again. For 6 months, I attended the highest political military training of the North Atlantic Alliance, NATO Defense College in Rome, Italy. A school that was founded by General Dwight Eisenhower back in 1951. NATO has contributed to peace and served its members well since its creation just after the Second World War. This was particularly the case during the Cold War, but even today, NATO's principle of collective defense is crucial in preventing aggressors from attacking any NATO territory. The key principle of NATO is its Article 5, which says that if one member state is attacked, it should be seen as an attack on all member states. Only once has Article 5 been invoked, not by any of the 26 European states, but by your country after 9/11. There were two main issues during my almost 5 years from 2001 as ambassador to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Jordan. Who knows much about Jordan? It's not a very well-known country, really. It's small, but it's strategically very important. You may not see the map in front of you, but Jordan is bordering on the West Bank, on Israel, on Saudi Arabia, on Iraq, and on Syria. As you can see, a challenging post for diplomats. Over the years, numerous attempts have been made to reach a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that would allow both Israelis and Palestinians to live within secure borders in their own states. Best known is the so-called Oslo Accord from 1993, whereby Israel and the Palestinian Authority recognized each other's right to exist. The Oslo Accord was a roadmap to peace that would eventually have led to the creation of a Palestinian state and international guarantees for Israel's security. Unfortunately, after a few years, the parties ceased to follow the map. While based in Jordan, I was also appointed ambassador to Iraq, and I had frank discussions with my American counterpart in Amman before the invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003. He and I strongly disagreed on whether any coalition of the willing should invade and occupy Iraq. Today, I think not many people will argue that it was a wise thing to occupy Iraq. It has certainly contributed to the sharp rise in terrorism and extreme violence over the past decade. My last foreign post was Athens, Greece. Athens is a city full of old memories from ancient Greece more than 2,000 years ago. I'm sure you all have heard about the great philosophers, Aristotle, Socrates, Platon, and many others. They have helped lay the foundation for present day's Western civilization and culture. Greece too is an illustration of the negative impact of corruption on society. It is a country with, I would say, systematic corruption. And its economy is rather weak. But it is a country with a great history, great influence on our lives, and it's a beautiful country with all the islands in the Aegean Sea, but also the mainland. So actually, if one day you can go to Europe, add Greece to Paris and the Norwegian fjords. That's my advice. I conclude by reminding you that my international journey started here at ABAC 50 years ago. I wish all of you an exciting journey once you graduate with good grades after hard work. As students today, you have the opportunity to succeed tomorrow. You all can help shape the future. You can make a difference. Yes, each and one of you can make a difference. And if you have a chance one day to join the Rotary Club, I encourage you to do so. Rotary is a great international organization where members are guided by the motto, service above self. Thank you for listening, and good luck to you.